So S2 sets out the specific disclosure requirements for an entity that has identified climate-related risks and opportunities as being a risk, a sustainability risk or opportunity that could be reasonably certain to affect its prospects in accordance with S1. And we expect that to be most entities, if not all. Now, looking at some of the specific areas of disclosure that S2 focuses on, I'd like to focus on three key areas. One is transition planning, the other is climate resilience, and the third is Scope 1, 2 and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at those in turn. So in terms of transition planning, we ask for information to enable investors to understand the transition risks that a company is exposed to. And a key part of the information that's asked for in S2 is information about the transition plans that a company has in place. Now, it may have chosen to set them itself, or it may have been required to set them by regulators or other public authorities. Either way, information needs to be provided to investors. And a key disclosure that we expect would be required as part of transition planning is an entity's carbon emission targets. So what are its greenhouse gas emissions targets, and how does it plan to achieve its targets? And S2 asks for information to be provided about the targets that have been set, whether those are gross greenhouse gas emission targets, whether those are net greenhouse gas emission targets, and where they are net targets, if a company is using carbon credits, S2 asks that information be provided to explain the types of carbon credits that an entity has purchased or is planning to purchase, and the features of those credits. S2 is very neutral in that regard. We don't say what's a good or a bad transition strategy. We don't say whether it's good or bad to have a gross emission target or a net one. We don't say whether carbon credits are good or bad, but we ask for information to be provided because investors want to understand what a company's targets are, to see whether they agree with the targets that a company is setting and whether they believe that their targets are credible. And so S2 is designed to provide that information. So that's transition planning. Looking next at climate resilience, S2 asks that a company provide information so that an investor is able to understand how resilient a company's strategy is to different climate scenarios. And S2 requires that an entity uses climate-related scenario analysis to support those disclosures. We don't ask that the actual analysis be provided as part of disclosures, but the assessment that an entity makes about its resilience as a result of different strategies is what has to be provided to investors, and information about the approach that a company took to apply the scenario analysis. And the idea here is to inform investors about the different potential paths and performance of a company and its strategy in different climate scenarios, reflecting the huge uncertainty about those outcomes. The third area is Scope 1, 2 and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So the Scope 1 emissions, those that a company itself is directly emitting. Scope 2, those are resulting from the energy that it purchases, and Scope 3, the emissions in its value chain. We ask for that information to be provided whenever it is material for a company. And it's very, very important information, and Scope 3 information is of course very topical. The board decided that that was important information to be provided when it's material because it really helps investors to understand a company's transition risks. If you have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in your supply chain, either from your source materials or from the end use of your products, that can result in the need to change the business model. It may mean that a regulator says you need to adjust the way that you run your business. It may mean that your customers feel differently about buying your products. Therefore, it affects future cash flows because it affects the way that a company is able to run its business, which is why Scope 3 greenhouse gas emission information is such an important part of S2. So we ask for information about the range of Scope 3 categories in accordance with the GHG protocol, and we ask for some very particular disclosures about financed emissions. And this is a very important part of S2. So for those who have commercial banking activities, insurance activities or asset management activities, we ask for some more disaggregated information about the greenhouse gas emissions associated with your investing and your lending activities. And we ask for incremental information, not just about the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from that financing or investment activity, but also the industries to which you are lending or providing funding. And this is a very important area of information, including for prudential regulatory purposes, which is why that is part of the mandatory or disclosure requirements in the body of S2. Again, if it's material, it has to be provided for those undertaking those activities.